This is the Sri Ramana Maharshi satsang, a time to listen, reflect, and deeply meditate. Know yourself and be always free and at peace. Here we are. Welcome. Excuse me. That's not my picture. That's my picture. Welcome. I'm Richard Clarke, hosting this satsang. I'm not a guru or a teacher like you. I love this teaching and just want to share it. I'm reviewing and commenting on the book's Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi. And today I'm using Talk 107. And let me get to it. Later, the yogi asked, how is the spiritual uplift of the people to be affected? What are the instructions to be given to them? The Maharshi replied, it differs according as one is a yani or an ayani. A yani does not find anything different or separate from the self. All are the self. It's wrong to imagine that there is a world, that there is a body in it, and that you dwell in the body. If the truth is known, the universe and what is beyond it will be found to be only the self, the outlook. Why does God permit suffering in the world? The disciple asked. Should not he, with his omnipotence, do away with it at one stroke and ordain the universal realization of God? Maharshi replies, suffering is the way for realization of God. The devotee asks, should not he ordain it differently? To which Maharshi replies, it is the way. The disciple continues to ask questions, and he asks, are yoga, religion, etc., antidotes to suffering? And Maharshi says, they help you to overcome suffering. The devotee asks, why should there be suffering? And the Maharshi responds, who suffers? What is suffering? No answer. And then he was just silent. And finally, the yogi rose up, prayed for Sri Bhagavan's blessing for his own work, and expressed great regret for his hasty return. He looked very sincere and devoted and even emotional. Excuse me, here we are. So the first reading that I gave you was incorrect. And it was really, Ramana was asked, how is the spiritual uplift of the people to be affected? What are the instructions to be given to them? And Maharshi responds, they differ according to the temperament of the individuals. So Maharshi is asked how to spiritually uplift people and what instructions to give them. Spiritual uplift in this context refers to self-realization or liberation. Ramana responded, that instructions differ according to the person's temperament and the ripeness of their mind. So there can't be a one-size-fits-all approach. Each person has their own set of assumptions, misidentifications, illusions, and tendencies that obscure the direct knowledge of the self. Each person, then, needs to walk a path that will resolve their particular imagined identity. Each person has a unique temperament, inclination, and level of spiritual ripeness that must be taken into account when approaching spiritual practice and when offering spiritual guidance. Some people are more intellectually inclined and may benefit from philosophical discussions about the nature of reality and the self. This would be to prepare them for an experiential rather than an intellectual approach. The mind can only go so far. Some are full of themselves and full of ego desires. They will benefit from karma yoga, selfless service. Others may be more emotionally driven and need a more devotional practice, such as chanting or prayer, a way to love an external God. Still, others may benefit from physical practices such as yoga or the directed mental attention of meditation. A few are ready to look at consciousness with consciousness. Furthermore, spiritual maturity is also a crucial factor in determining the appropriate path and instruction for someone. If they're just beginning their spiritual journey, they need to lay a foundation and establish some kind of spiritual practice. While those who have been practicing for a long time may benefit from more advanced instructions to deepen their self-knowledge and shift their focus from objective practices to non-objective aspects of the practice. Ramana Maharshi's response emphasizes the importance of individualized guidance in spiritual practice. A true spiritual practice must have the wisdom to recognize the difference among the students and provide them with appropriate instructions and practices to help them progress along their individual path. If you don't have a spiritual teacher, you need to honestly look at yourself and determine what is best for you. Where are you now? You may need to work through this in stages. Most people do. Do what is needed where you are now. Don't try to jump ahead. If you're not ready, then practice will be slow and perhaps progress will not happen at all. So if you're stuck, go back to an earlier stage of practice. From low to high, these stages are karma yoga at the base. This is selfless service, and it's done with the body. Bhakti yoga, devotional practice, surrender. This is done with the heart. Raja yoga or meditation. This is done with the mind. And then jnana yoga, the practice of self-knowledge. beyond the mind, looking into being and non-cognitive direct knowledge. Then the disciple asks, why does God permit suffering in the world? Should he not, with his omnipotence, do away with it at one stroke and attain the universal realization of God? To which Maharshi responds, suffering is the way for realization of God. So the yogi asks Ramana why God allows suffering in the world and why God doesn't just use his great power to end it and bring about the universal realization of God. Good question. Ramana says that suffering is actually the pathway to realize God. Suffering can lead you to seek spiritual understanding and ultimately leads to self-realization. Advaita teaches that the ultimate reality is non-dual and that all suffering rises from a sense of separation to this reality. So suffering can be the catalyst for spiritual growth by prompting you to question your assumptions and the choices that you make in life, and to seek a deeper understanding of yourself and the world around you. All this to avoid suffering. From the Advaita perspective, the idea of God permitting or not permitting suffering isn't relevant, since God is not seen as some separate entity controlling the universe, but rather is the ultimate reality that underlies all existence. The suffering that individuals experience is a product of their own ignorance and attachment to their sense of individual identity, which brings a sense of separation from the non-dual reality. The Buddhist word for suffering is dukkha. Dukkha really means not satisfying. So a life that is not satisfying makes you look for alternatives, like maybe spiritual practice. Ramana says that suffering is not an impediment to spiritual growth, but rather drives motivation for you to look within yourself, deepen your self-knowledge, and realize your true nature. Rather than asking why God allows suffering, the best use is to use your experiences and to seek spiritual realization and overcome the ignorance that is at the center of the suffering. The devotee asks, should he not ordain it differently? Maharshi says, it is the way. So the yogi asks Ramana if God should not ordain things differently to eliminate suffering in the world. Maharshi's response was simply, it is the way. It is what it is. Ramana's response can be seen as the recognition that suffering and other apparent hardships are an inherent part of the human experience, and that they serve to drive spiritual growth and realization, rather than questioning why things are the way they are. accepting what is and using every experience, positive or negative, as an opportunity to deepen your spiritual understanding and to better know yourself. Then the devotee asks, are yoga, religion, etc., antidotes to suffering? And Maharshi says they help you to overcome suffering. The yogi asks Ramana if practices like yoga and religion can serve as antidotes to suffering. Maharshi's response was that they can indeed help people overcome suffering. Practices like yoga and religion can help you overcome the sense of separation from the absolute and lead to a reduction in suffering. Yoga is a set of physical and mental practices from ancient India designed to promote physical health, mental clarity, and spiritual growth. The physical postures and breathing exercises of yoga can help you develop greater awareness of your body and mind, leading to a reduction in stress and anxiety. Yoga also includes meditation, which has become a primary practice of seekers around the world. Religion can provide people with a sense of community and a framework for understanding the world and their place in it. Many religious traditions also include practices like prayer and meditation and acts of service. These can promote spiritual growth and reduce suffering. Religion provides devotees with an external deity onto which devotion can be directed. Devotion can lead to surrender of the ego. Ramana's response is that practices like yoga and religion can serve as tools to overcome suffering by promoting physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. It all depends on what stage of practice is right for you at your current level of development. Note, though, that these practices, yoga and religion, are not the only means to spiritual growth, nor the primary mean to self-realization. Self-inquiry and other practices aimed at realizing the non-dual nature of reality are the primary paths to realization and to the end of suffering. Their appropriateness depends on the stage of your practice. And finally, the yogi asks, why should there be suffering? To which Maharshi responds, who suffers? What is suffering? Then he says, no answer, and it's just silent. Ramana's final response was silence, in essence, to ask the questioner to examine within himself the nature of suffering and the one who suffers. The question, why should there be suffering, is a common human one, with the desire to understand the cause of suffering and find a way to eliminate it. However, in Advaita, suffering is seen as rising from a sense of separation from the ultimate reality. which is non-dual and all-encompassing. So the way to end suffering is through self-knowledge. By asking who suffers, what is suffering, Ramana is directing the questioner to look within himself and examine the nature of the self and the experience of suffering. This is self-inquiry, questioning the nature of your own sense of identity and realizing the non-dual nature of reality. Advaita says the ego I is illusory, a product of the misidentification with the body and mind, with transient phenomena. By questioning the nature of the self, you begin to see through this illusion and realize the non-dual nature of reality. And now we have a discourse from Nomi with the rise of I. Let me cue it up.
The Maharshi has said that with the rise of I, or the ego notion, all else rises. And with its subsidence, all else subsides. The all else that rises is the non-self, the non-existent, the unreal. Since it is unreal, it does not actually rise. For the unreal does not come to be, and the reality or being alone ever is. But for those who assume the existence of an I, all else seems to rise, and there is division and dualism. It is the veiling of the undivided nature of one's own self, the homogeneous being consciousness bliss, that gives rise to the projection of multiplicity. In truth, the singular undivided existence alone is and always is. Because the rising of I, or the assumption of existing as an ego entity, is the cause of all else, that is duality and its consequent bondage and suffering. Abandonment of that ego is said to be the means to liberation. How can you abandon something that is not real? It is in the discerning knowledge of its unreality that it is abandoned. All bondage and suffering has its root in this ego I. And with the dissolution of that false assumption, the potential for suffering is dissolved. With the dissolution of the ego notion, your own self shines for itself in self-knowledge. And therefore, all spiritual practice aims at the dissolution of the ego. And therefore, the most direct approach of all practices is to perceive what the nature of the I is. There is existence, and there is the sense of I. And in delusion, the two are confused. So then you start just with that very apparently individualized existence and determine what its nature is. Its I-ness being unreal will vanish. What remains is the existence that actually has always been there, the real self. The entire inquiry is completely non-objective. It deals with your immediate sense of identity, your ever-present sense of existence. Discern clearly what you regard as I, yourself. Every idea about anything else is based on this idea of I. The definition of the self will determine the experience of anything else. If the definition of the self be the body, the world is experienced. If it is not, then not. If the definition of the self is a thinking entity, a thinker, or one defined by some kind of thought, then the mind will seem to be an existent entity. And ideas will be regarded as real. If that is not the definition, then that is not the case. What is the true definition of your own self? The Vedas declare tatvamasi, that you are. Ayam Brahma. This self is Brahman. But you must find it out for yourself. And when I say find it out for yourself, while the instruction may seem to be posed to an individual, if that very individual being dives within, inquiring, who am I? The individuality is not at all. And only the real self, Brahman, is existing. And that alone knows itself. Therefore, understand self-realization to be free of the states or conditions of the body, of the mind, of the individual entirely. There is no one existing outside of the self. Since there is no one else other than the self, it is ridiculous to speak of oneself being unrealized or oneself later being realized. There is only that which constitutes the realization, which is not an object, not an event, not a transitory experience, but just being, existence. Inquire within yourself and come to a conclusive knowledge of this existence.
All right, and let us now take a few minutes to inquire. Notice that you exist, and you know you exist without thinking about it or feeling it. You know it directly. Like this, you should know yourself. Now, inquire, investigate within yourself. What path is best for you? Body, heart, mind, formless being. What suits your temperament and your state of spiritual knowledge, of self-knowledge. And where do you find spiritual support for your path? Is it from teachers? Reading? Videos? Is it from within yourself? Now, the path can be seen as a way to eliminate suffering. Who suffers? Your ego suffers. Do you suffer? Suffering is something you know about. That means it's not who you are. You are the knower. Who am I? What is the nature of my existence? Feel the answer. Don't think about it. All right. And now to our chant. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om, peace, peace, peace. All right, questions, comments? Hello, Evelyn.
Hi, there's Evelyn. Hi.
Now, I think it's interesting that Ramana says that suffering is the thing that impels us along the path. So if there wasn't suffering, we just want to be smelling the flowers.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, the crucial part was really understanding where suffering was coming from.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, I
yes.
had to get that. And once I got that it was nothing out there, it was all a story that I was making. Now I can catch it if I'm,
Yes,
being aware
right.
to say, just stop. Don't go there. Don't touch that.
Mm-hmm. And what I've noticed is even if I have times, one of the things I call them is ego storms,
Uh-huh.
that, it's quick and it's over, and I don't hold
Mm-hmm.
on to anything, and it can just pass.
Mm-hmm. And also I can observe it happening in other people, how they're just cooking up a suffering in that mind of theirs that's just, it's painful. But you can see that they're doing it, and then you can know that I do that too sometimes.
And you can also let them do it, and you don't have
Yeah.
to help them with it.
No, no. But it's best not to just say, well, that's just a story in your head, That's
Right,
not
right. I know. I've
that's not well received.
tried different versions of your suffering isn't real, or your suffering is just something you're doing to yourself,
Yeah, that doesn't
and
really work.
have not found a good response. You know, even though is true.
Yeah. Hmm.
You're ready to say something, Doug?
Oh, was I thinking out loud?
Yes.
So what suffering can be a past, but so often it's only a path towards further suffering.
Well, one of the problems with suffering is people try to avoid it instead of figuring out how to use it.
Yeah.
That's also one of the deals with mindfulness, is that if you're doing mindfulness well, then you open up to the suffering and let yourself experience it. And I think doing that helps drive the motivation to figure out some way to put it to an end.
Yeah, my butt is black and blue. I don't want that anymore.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. And so I hate to say it, but it could be that those bad people that are making us suffering are all just helping us out.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I really hate to think that, because some of those bad people, I'm committed to feeling like they're bad people. I won't mention any names.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the thing is about suffering is, like Evelyn was saying, they don't do it to us.
Yeah. Even though it looks very convincing.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things that helped me with people was that recognizing that their actions came from their own suffering, which is often very deep.
Yes. Yes.
A suffering ego can lash out in a lot of ways.
And, if we can have compassion for them, then that's actually something that opens space in our lives and their
Yeah,
lives.
for sure. Mm-hmm.
I still feel like the Buddhist teaching of compassion
Yeah.
is a very powerful and a blessing.
Mhm.
And the first person, of course, to have compassion for is yourself.
Yes. Yeah. Mhm.
Catholics, which I used to be one, believe that suffering is good,
Uh-huh.
that you need to suffer. That's how you earn your way into heaven.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
they got it half right.
but for us, the best thing to do with that suffering, one of the things is just notice whatever it is going on, and we don't need to hold on to it. The hard part of suffering, I've noticed, is when I latch onto it,
Mhm.
and then it can be bad. There was some time where, in a fit of stupidity, I stuck my hand into a vacuum fan, and there was a terrible clunk, and I was holding it so I didn't bleed on the rug. And they took me to the hospital. I was afraid I was going to lose my finger. It was so bad. But the doctor, before he did anything, poked the end of it with a needle. And I felt the pain of the needle, and all this tension of I'm going to lose my finger went away. And then my finger hurt, but it's funny, I wasn't suffering anymore.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mhm. Hmm.
Anyway, thank you all for
Thank you.
coming together again. And namaste, and may your
Namaste.
heart be filled with peace.
Namaste. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this Ramana Maharshi video, subscribe, like, and send me a comment.